On this edition of Independent Sources, unhealthy advertising, why food and beverage companies are directly targeting vulnerable populations in poor and minority communities with their ads for their products.
Independent Sources, your window to the city's ethnic and immigrant communities. Your host this week, Zyphus Lebrun.
A recent study published in the Journal of Urban Health suggests that MTA-regulated ads with unhealthy foods and beverages are deliberately targeting vulnerable communities in the Bronx. The study was co-authored by researchers from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Lehman College in the Bronx and New York University in Manhattan. It correlated subway ridership information with census data and dietary intake statistics from a city health department survey. Among some of the findings were that less healthful ads, specifically ads in Spanish directed at youth, were directly correlated with poverty and lower high school graduation rates. This at a time when 1 in 5 kindergarten students and more than half of the city's population is overweight. I spoke with two of the authors of the study, Dr. Sean Lucan and Omar Sanan, about their findings. Dr. Sean Lucan, Omar Sanan, thank you very much for being in studio today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right. So let's just get started with this. Recent study done over the last few years. Why was this study done? Why did you guys choose to do this study?
So I'm a family doctor at Montefiore Medical Center, and I take care of patients, children through adult. Most of my patients are overweight and suffer from a variety of diet-related chronic diseases, and I realize they have tremendous obstacles to eating better. And so most of the research that I do at Einstein College of Medicine is to look at the food environment, look at the sources of food in the landscape that people have access to and how that may influence their eating behaviors. What I found is that the food environment is beyond just the food sources that are out there, though. It also is the messages to eat food and what advertisers are telling people that they should consume. And so I wanted to really get a sense of what those messages were, who they were focused on and what they were targeting, and what types of advertising people were exposed to in their daily lives. I thought the subway system or the transit system might be a good place to start and kind of an approachable first step.
Mm-hmm. Now, the research was focused in the Bronx specifically. Any reason for that?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, I'm located in the Bronx, so conveniently and logistically it made sense. But also, my patients are in the Bronx and the patients of Montefiore Health System. So it was, it was a personal quest as much as it was a research quest. I wanted to know what my patients were exposed to and what kind of messages they were getting, and how that may influence their dietary decisions and overall health.
And now, one of the findings was that the advertisements were found in areas where the populations were either minority populations, large minority populations, and in some cases, when ads were in Spanish in particular, they were targeted at communities where there was not a very high level of education. Do you want to, extrapolate a little bit more on that for the audience, please?
I should say that ads were everywhere. Right? There was tons of advertising, and Omar can speak a little to that in terms of the ads and what was available in the different stations, and particularly some of the stations that had just a disproportionate number of ads.
Right. So yeah, Omar.
Right, and so my colleague and I, we rode all 7 lines in the Bronx, and we stopped at 68 different stations. And so we assessed the ads anywhere from the intra-city exits and also on the platforms of the stations. We noted the brands and companies being featured, and also the sizes as well.
Right.
And so some of the stations featured no ads, but more surprisingly, a lot of stations, including like the one at Yankee Stadium, overwhelmingly featured ads for unhealthy foods.
Right.
That was something surprising for us.
Right. Now, who were the biggest culprits, as regards to these advertisements?
So going off of like Yankee Stadium, for example, that had over 200 ads in total, but for the unhealthy food ads, it had 20 unhealthy food ads. The biggest culprit in that station was Red Bull, for example. Off the top of my head, a lot of alcohol companies appeared as well, such as Coors Light. A lot of hard alcohol, such as like Bulldog vodka and things like that, also appeared as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I should say that Yankee Stadium is a station where you would expect a lot of advertising, right? So there's a lot of foot traffic there. There's a high potential viewership. You wouldn't be surprised to find a lot of advertising there, and proportionately a lot of unhealthy food advertising. But what was striking was that when we looked across the system, excluding Yankee Stadium, was that the unhealthy food and beverage advertising didn't correlate with ridership, right? So it wasn't that these messages or these ads were directed to the widest possible audiences, they were directed to specific audiences.
Right.
So marketers weren't looking for viewers in general, they were looking for specific viewers. And those viewers tended to be vulnerable, high-risk populations.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys find that there was a correlation between the ads and the areas where those numbers of, for instance, hypertension, diabetes, and so forth were greatest?
Correct. So Omar and some other students that summer did, a Herculean feat going into the Bronx and looking at, they rode all 7 lines, they stopped at all 68 stations, they looked at every ad there, which was over 1,500.
Wow.
Actually, when we were going from station to station, our results weren't immediately clear. And so it was when we took our entire data set and actually linked it to other data sources that a clear picture started to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so the situation is definitely subtle, but our data shows that targeting is actually going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to clarify that, so Omar and the other students went out and collected all this data from all the stations, and then I linked that data to data on ridership from the MTA, to data on demographics from the Census Bureau, and data on health parameters from the New York City Department of Health. Mm-hmm. And so looking at that, we could make correlations and say, where were these ads and how did they tie to different characteristics of the communities in which the stations were located. Mm-hmm. And so it was abundantly clear that the ads for less healthy foods and beverages were found in higher risk, more vulnerable communities. So communities with lower educational attainment, higher rates of poverty, more minority representation, specifically higher percentages of Black and Hispanic residents, and more children. And then we also saw correlations with health statistics. So these unhealthy foods were being marketed in communities that were suffering disproportionately from low fruit and vegetable intake, high sugar sweetened beverage consumption, high rates of diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension.
All right. And now I know that there has to be, in certain instances, these ad companies, they choose specific areas where they want these ads to go. And in some cases, it might be more expensive to target certain areas. I mean, did you guys find that in your research as well, that these ads were being placed in these at probably a higher cost to these companies?
Well, so speaking strictly as a scientist, right, we found these correlations, and to explain the correlation, one explanation is that there's targeting among the unhealthy foods. The other explanation could be that there's targeting of all the other products out there, the movies, the entertainment, the cell phone companies, the cable companies, everyone else that was in the subway station. It's conceivable, you could make an argument that all those other companies were just gearing their ads to healthy, white, wealthy adults, and that the only ad space left was that for, for the unhealthy advertisers to advertise in, were these ads in these vulnerable communities. That seems like a highly unlikely scenario, and so makes us think that there is targeting at play. Now, to the point about cost, yes, it costs more to place ads in specific stations. So per conversation with the MTA, for random distribution across the system, it costs a set amount. If you want to select the stations where you want to put the ads, though, it costs not quite twice as much, but substantially more. So, if there is targeting going on, as our data strongly suggests there is, the companies are paying a premium for it. Mm-hmm. And then the question is why? Mm-hmm. It seemed obvious to me that you don't pay that premium unless you're making an investment where you're going to get a return. So in targeting specific groups as opposed to the widest possible audiences, that has to relate to greater profit. And it means, I think taking advantage of vulnerable communities.
Mm-hmm. Now, Omar, in the process of, collecting this information and so forth, did you ever feel that perhaps in just talking to the everyman that he or she got a sense of what was going on, like being aware of, if you will, the strings of the puppeteer or the walls of the matrix, if you will?
And I think, that's actually part of the problem, not being aware of what exactly advertising, that influence that it has on the person. And, again, speaking to my experience going from station to station, a lot of the people seemed oblivious as to, why we were going and, recording all the different ads. And some people would come up to us and ask us why we were doing it. And, we would explain to them, what our end goal was. And for them, it didn't really seem to connect right away. So I think that's awareness is part of the problem as well.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, while the data clearly shows targeting, and that seemed pretty unambiguous no matter how we ran the numbers, and we ran it several ways just to make sure that we were coming to the right conclusion, that finding isn't so obvious when you're riding in the stations themselves, right? I mean, that becomes obvious when you look at the whole system as a total and link it with these other data sets. But I think this is really subtle and insidious. So it's easy for companies to get away with this kind of behavior because it's so hard to detect. But when you actually look at the totality of the data, it's pretty inescapable, the conclusions.
What do you hope will come out of this research?
I think one thing is just greater awareness. So raising awareness in communities, particularly communities that seem to be targeted, to allow them, give them the information they need to kind of vote with their wallets, to say, we do not accept this targeting. We do not accept this taking advantage of, kind of populations that need this treatment the least. And for other communities to say, let's hold companies socially accountable. I'm not part of any of these vulnerable communities to which these advertisers are targeting, but I might choose with my own dollars to say I'm not going to support this type of behavior. I'm going to hold these companies accountable, and say that this will not stand. Now, I mean, that's just on the information side, the public awareness side, and kind of the consumer action side. But I think government has a role to play in this too. And certainly can. So there's already existing regulation out there restricting tobacco products, right? So tobacco can't be advertised in the transit system. And there's movement afoot to try to get a ban on alcohol advertising in the subway system and the broader transit system. So I think that might be a first step in sort of addressing at least one aspect of unhealthy beverages, and then deciding, where that goes or how that, may expand to cover a broader range of products remains to be seen. But I think that's a step in the direction of some action that at least government could play in this.
All right. Well, Dr. Sean Lucan and Omar, thank you very, very much for being in studio. This was a very enlightening conversation.
Thanks for having us.